Hello, sweet friends. So I am back with a reading from Chapter 9 from The Midwife's Apprentice by Cushman. Up here, Cushman. So this chapter is called The Bailiff's Wife's Baby. Here we go. A good nut year means a good baby year, the midwife said as she sent Alice and her nutting basket to the woods to see what kind of a year it would be. All day, Alice shook the young trees, climbed into the old ones, and gathered the hard-shelled bounty that fell. Hazelnuts, walnuts, chestnuts, almonds mounded in her basket and stirred her hunger with thoughts of hot roasted nuts on cold winter nights. That was the limit of her imaginings, for never had she heard of almond cream, pickled walnuts, or eels in chestnut sauce, such as they ate at the manor or the homes of rich merchants in London and York. Coming back from the woods, she saw the boys teasing the cat. She took a handful of nuts, the biggest and the hardest and the heaviest in her basket, and heaved them at the boys. "Touch that cat again," she shouted, "and I will unstop this bottle of rat's blood and viper's flesh and summon the devil, who will change you into women, and henceforth each of you will giggle like a woman and wear dresses like a woman and give birth like a woman." She was too startled by her outburst to be afraid. The boys were too startled by her outburst to move. And so Purr, the cat, escaped, and Alice reached the midwife's cottage unharmed. And until they were quite old, the boys in the dark of night sometimes were afraid that the midwife's bottle actually had the power to make them into women. It was fortunate that the boys never tested Alice's magic, for the bottle she shook so fiercely at them was naught but blackberry cordial she was to deliver to old Anna on her way home from nutting in the woods. And although it would have made the boys purple and sticky, no harm would have befallen them, and never would they have been able to give birth like a woman. That night, Joan the bailiff's wife sent for the midwife. Alice lighted Jane's way through the gloomy night with a rushlight that hissed and sputtered in the mist. The midwife chased Joan's husband, her young son, 2 pigs, and a pigeon out of the cottage, bade Alice wait for her in the yard, and slammed the cottage door. Alice dozed there in the wet through the long hours of the night. Shortly after dawn, when the sky turned not rosy and welcoming as it does in summer, but merely a lighter shade of gray, the midwife kicked her awake. "Up, beetle, and to the cottage for cowslip, mugwort, and pepper. By the 14 holy helpers, Joan will have to sneeze this baby out." So the midwife, as you know, she still is kind of refusing to call Alice by Alice. She's still calling her Beetle. When Alice returned, the midwife was waiting in the yard, her bottles and herbs and linen neatly packed in the basket beside her. "Has Joan then sneezed her baby out already?" Alice asked. "Ha!" responded the midwife. "This child looks never to come out. You go in and wipe Joan's face, and I will be back as soon as I can. Lady Agnes at the manor had started her labor and wishes me to attend her. They will pay me in silver, and the bailiff in chickens and beans. God and the baby's willing, I will have it all." Alice began to cry. "I do not know what to do. Mistress Jane, do not leave me. Do not leave her. I do not know what to do." Alice was silenced with a sharp slap. "Do nothing, you lackwit fool," the midwife spat. "She will never deliver that baby. It will die unborn, and I will take it dead from her when I return. Let her labor while I see to the Lady Agnes. I will come back, do what must be done, and collect both fees." Alice snuffled into her sleeve, leaving her nose dirty and red and no drier than it was. "Do nothing," repeated the midwife. In her state, Joan will not even remember that I left. Do nothing, say nothing. And off the midwife ran, up to the manor where warm fires blazed and the laboring mother was soothed with wine and syrups and kind words. Alice turned back to the dark, cold, nearly empty cottage, took a deep breath, and went in. She couldn't see the figure on the bed at first for all the smoke, and then realized that the writhing mound was Joan, the bailiff's proud wife, who washed her linen each week and never let herself be seen without shoes, even in summer. And there she was, a moaning, mewling mound on a straw bed. Remember, in these times, they didn't have the types of cozy mattresses that we do. Alice covered her mouth and her eyes and turned to go. She could tell the midwife that she'd waited with Joan. Who was now to know if she sat on the stoop until she heard the crinkle of the midwife's starched wimple? "Let me die, by the bones of St. Michael! Let me die, or help me die!" The moaning, mewling mound spoke, not as Alice expected, frantically or madly, but calmly and reasonably, asking for death. And to Alice it sounded all the more frightening and strange, as if a goose had spoken, or an egg, or the dung heap in the yard. Beetle, is that you? Joan asked. Where's the midwife? Oh, but to relieve herself. Means to go to the bathroom. Mistress, she will be back soon, and then your babe will be born. That's not actually where the midwife went, remember? Don't sham me, Beetle. I know this babe is stuck and will never be born, and we will both die soon. Why not now? Surely the midwife has something in her basket to help us along. Shh, mistress. 'Tis but pain and fright make you speak so, for else you'd never think of sending yourself to hell and the baby with you. Hell indeed, Beetle, and no worse than this suffering. Suddenly the proud, reasonable Joan became again the moaning, mewling mound. And then as the hot pains invaded her body, she shouted and thrashed and flailed, shrieking and kicking. Alice betook herself to the cottage door, ready to run from this horror. But the memory of the proud, frightened Joan of a moment ago kept her inside. And she asked herself, what would the midwife do were she here? What had Alice seen her do from the cottage windows all this year when the babe would not come and the mother looked to scream and... I'm sorry, I just got a notification of an email on my phone and I just lost my spot. And she asked herself, what would the midwife do were she here? What had Alice seen her do from the cottage windows all this year when the babe would not come and the mother looked to scream and thrash herself to death? What had Will done in the gravel pit to help Tansy with the calves who would not be born? Alice took another deep breath and returned to Joan's side. She gave her mugwort and warm ale to drink and spoke soothingly, calling her sweetheart and good old girl. She warmed oil over the fire and rubbed her head and belly as she had the cows, and she did not know the spells or the magic, so gave Joan all she had of care and courtesy and hard work. Remember, Alice kind of believes that the midwife has some sort of magic where, which allows her to do her job, which is delivering babies. So whenever she mentions the magic, that's what she means. Now, is it actually magic, like spells that the midwife is doing to help deliver babies? No, but that's kind of what Alice believes. So it was that in the middle of the night, when the monks were rising from their beds before midnight prayers, and in the towns revelers were returning home full of beef and wine, and at the manor the midwife was delivering Lady Agnes of her first son. So it was that a calmer, more rested Joan, with the kind attention of the midwife's apprentice, brought forth a daughter, feet first but perfectly formed, whom she called Alice Little. So in other words, this mother who Jane the midwife assumed would give birth to a baby who was not alive, in fact, wound up giving birth to a perfectly healthy baby, and she did it with Alice with her, without the midwife there, and she's now named her little baby Alice Little. Alice had washed Alice Little and wrapped her in clean linen and laid her in the father's arms before Jane the midwife bustled up the path and into the cottage. Jane made some remarks, which no one believed, about having left for just an instant and stuck her hand out for her fee. Do you think it's fair for Jane the midwife to ask for money payment if she wasn't even there doing anything? The bailiff said, "We have no need of you, Jane. Your helper has taken care of us with her 2 strong hands and her good common sense." Well, at that, Alice felt so much pride and satisfaction that she had to let them out somehow, so she smiled, which felt so good that she thought she might do it again. Facing the midwife's jealous anger, she went back to their cottage, ate some cold soup and hard bread, lay down on her straw mat by the fire, and had a dream about her mother, which, upon waking, she could not remember. Does that ever happen to you? Do you ever have dreams and then you wake up and you can't quite remember them? Sometimes that happens. So I have a question for you to think about before you dive into chapter 10. Do you think the midwife is going to be upset with Alice? Or do you think she's going to be pleased with Alice? Bye, friends.